What's up, everyone? Hope you're all doing well. Thank you for those who have been patiently waiting. Not that I'm assuming everyone is going to be waiting on me, but appreciate those who are joining the session to get some feedback, ask some questions about your assessments, because that's what I'm here to do for the next 30, 60 minutes, longer if we need. I know we've done much longer when there's been a lot of questions about your exams and things like that. So if you do have any questions relating to your upcoming assessments for English or otherwise, year 7 to 12, New South Wales, Victoria, elsewhere, now's the time to ask your questions. So in the chat, you can put any question you like. You might have an assessment task that you've been given that you want some advice on. You might want to know how to approach a particular topic, a particular text. So I'm here now to help you with any questions of the kind. And I also have a submission from someone. Someone submitted a reflection piece based on the craft of writing module. So I'll go through that reflection piece as well, just to give you some pointers on how you can improve those when you're doing the crafting, well, I should say the craft of writing module. But also, if you're in Vic, creating texts, very similar. So how do you actually reflect on your own writing? How do you actually write a reflection piece or a paragraph? Someone has submitted that, so I'll go through some feedback on that one. But just up front, let me know if you've got any questions. Let me know if everything's coming through for you okay in the chat, and we will get into some feedback. I know it's a busy assessment period right now. A lot of students have an assessment in the next couple of weeks. A lot of year 12 students have an assessment in about 2 to 3 weeks' time. So critical point in time right now, if you do have a specific assessment task that you've been given, feel free to ask if you have any questions about it, how to approach, how to break down a specific question. A lot of students are doing multimodals where they have to kind of add some audiovisual elements to their presentation. The key thing to note with a multimodal task is that it's typically like a spoken essay, but adapted to a particular audience. So what I would always recommend as a starting point, if you're doing a multimodal assessment, where you're basically doing a video presentation, or you're going to create a PowerPoint or a Canva presentation and then speak over the top of it, is first of all just to draft draft an essay as if you're going to read out the essay out loud, and then from there, you can adapt it to the audience and make sure that you are tweaking relevant parts of the language to suit the purpose for which you are presenting the task. Sometimes with a task, they say, you're doing a TEDx talk and you've got to talk to all of the year 12 students. Okay, great. Well, we want to tweak things a little bit for that purpose. But at the end of the day, you're still going to be presenting your analysis, most likely, subject to the instruction. And teachers are still going to want to hear the sophistication of your concepts, and you're still going to need to have a structure. So even if you're doing a multimodal assessment coming up, make sure that first and foremost, you have a very concrete draft as if you were going to write it in the exam, and then you can make the adaptations afterwards. At least that's how I would approach it. So you can make the adjustments following the draft. I would draft an essay out as if I was going to read it out loud, and then I would add some rhetorical questions in, and don't go crazy with that. I was going to say, don't go over the top. In terms of rhetorical questions, those kind of cliche persuasive devices or rhetorical devices should be used sparingly. So, rhetorical question might feature once at the end of a 3 to 4 sentence introduction, where you give the audience something to ponder, or you frame your thesis as a question, and you're kind of implying your position. So you might use that once or twice throughout the whole piece. Repetition is a good one, subtle repetition to emphasize a particular point, and also engaging with the audience directly through your language. So using second person pronouns or first person collective plural pronouns, meaning we, our, or you, right? What do you think? How do we think as a society? So using those kind of pronouns, not just framing things objectively from third person, that's going to help you engage the audience and satisfy the requirements of a multimodal presentation as if you were giving a talk to someone. But ultimately, it's a spoken essay adapted using some rhetorical devices and making sure you've looked carefully at the audience and purpose in the instruction to ensure you are ticking those boxes, because that could have serious implications for the final presentation of it. One thing as well, just with multimodals, just because I've been seeing a few of them recently, when you're doing the visual presentation, don't overload the slides. Like, don't have too much going on. It's good to just have like one image at a time with maybe a little bit of text. Maybe it's just a short phrase or a short quote, and then a meaningful symbolic image. And then you talk about your points while holding that on the screen for a while. So don't make the visual be too distracting. You mainly want to have something up that's symbolic. Maybe if you're referring to a specific scene and it's a film, you have a screenshot there and then you speak to that. That would make sense. And if you're doing specific quotes from a prose fiction, you might have a symbolic illustration of the concept with some key words from the quote on there. But don't have large chunks of text on any one slide for a visual presentation. All right. You're doing module C. Is it Samia? Sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly. What's coming up for you in module C? What text are you looking at? What text type are you looking at doing if you're still on at the moment? Are you doing imaginative, discursive, persuasive? If you don't know yet, what's your preference? And do you have any idea of the assessment task? So that might help us give some practical advice on that. While you do that, I might show you the Module C reflection, what a student submitted. And again, if you're someone who wants to submit work for feedback, just use the link underneath these YouTube videos. That in the description, there's a link there where you can submit a paragraph of any kind of work that you've done. Don't submit a whole piece. Just submit, up to 100, 150 words, and then I can give you detailed feedback on that when we get to it, if we get to it. But I will be trying to look at more and more responses. So definitely feel free to submit those using the link. In terms of looking at some feedback right now, let's have a look here. Let's share this one. No, yes. Okay. So I'm going to just make this a bit bigger so everyone can see what's going on. So we're looking at a craft of writing reflection here. And this was a paragraph from the reflection piece. So this was a body paragraph. This is a body paragraph that we're looking at. Okay. And the student had used Steve Jobs' speech as inspiration for their piece. We're not looking at the actual composition they wrote, but we want to look at how they've reflected on their use of particular techniques or stylistic features. So let's have a look at how it's worded. Additionally, like Jobs' use of an anecdotal first-person narration in stories from his life to convey success amidst failures, thus my composition emulates an anecdotal account of a younger first person's perspective during a stormy night to illustrate humanity's passive living amongst life's challenges. Okay, so let's just break this into the sentences, because that one's a little bit clunky and it doesn't make sense after the comma, but we can probably break down quite easily what you were trying to say and how you could do it better, because you've got enough substance there. So looking at what the student's done, I'm not sure if this is your first sentence, but generally for a reflection paragraph, you still want to have what we can call a topic sentence or a point. I would almost call it like a purpose sentence. We normally say a point for the first sentence of a paragraph. You can also say purpose in this case, purpose or point, because when you do the craft of writing, the key focus is purpose. Why did the composer that you studied write what they did? And then how did they do it, of course? What were the stylistic devices that they used? But understanding why they did that, what was the intended effect on the audience, on the reader, that's the key thing that I would focus on, rather than just doing your standard analysis, okay? Impact on the reader or audience. Intended impact on the audience or reader. That's kind of the first sentence that I would want to have. And you can also, of course, include a stylistic device. I like kind of having one key stylistic device per paragraph. So that's kind of dividing up your paragraph, or rather the sentence, into how and why. Okay, so that is how plus why did they do it? How did they do it? They used a first person narrative voice or first person narration. First person narration. You also say anecdotal first person narration. So you kind of, this student's merging two different styles there into one, and it might be worth kind of breaking those up just to be a little bit clearer, because you've got use of anecdotes, personal anecdotes, and you've got the use of first person. Now, obviously they go hand in hand, but I'm just thinking that could get a little bit clunky or convoluted, and I'd rather do each of those features justice. You could still talk about both of them in the one paragraph, or you might actually decide to split the two. They do reinforce each other quite nicely, having a personal anecdote using the first person voice. You can say first person narration in the sense that you're telling these anecdotal stories through a first person narrative voice. But I would maybe just be a little bit clearer about how you're doing that there. So you got first person narration slash, why does that sound funny to say? Personal anecdotes, and then plus the why. In this case, the student has said Jobs has used a first person narration to convey success amidst failures. The problem there is, and I'm just going to break it up because that the thus doesn't make sense. And let's just focus on what you've said about Jobs. Steve Jobs, you say he uses a first person narrative voice to tell these anecdotes from his life, these stories from his life. That's what an anecdote is, a short story or reflection from someone's life. And you've used a good quote to back that up, stories from his life. That literally is what we're trying to say. But then you say the purpose of it is to convey success amidst failures. Now, one key takeaway for everyone watching this is when you talk about the effect of a particular technique, make sure that the effect ties into the impact on the audience, not just the general effect. This is what I was talking about. So see how that says to convey success amidst failures? That's not quite speaking to the intended impact on the audience, which we're going to do in purple. Okay, so instead of to convey success amidst failures, what about saying something relating to the idea of it being first person? Well, naturally, if you speak in first person, that kind of humanizes you. You become more human when you tell a story from your perspective, and you are vulnerable and authentic. So instead of saying to convey success amidst failures and ending it there, we could say to humanize, right? Jobs uses that, right, to humanize his personal story of his narrative of resilience, right? So humanize his journey from failure towards success. Now, this is a really subtle change. I've still said the success amidst failures, but I've said it in a way where the verb I'm using to humanize his journey is directly connected to the first person nature of the narration. If you say something from your point of view, you sound more human because you're sharing it personally. You're not just talking in third person about someone else. So if you want to build empathy from the audience, and he probably wants to inspire his audience to do the same, which means he needs to be human and relatable, then it's important that he does humanize. So the key takeaway here is you need to word your effects in a way where it relates to the purpose in terms of the impact on the audience or the reader. So the first person narration links to the humanization of his story, okay? And then that then leads to a sense of inspiration, right? To humanize his journey from failure towards success. And I can even extend this. Jobs' use of that to humanize. So I'd say Jobs uses or employs an anecdotal first-person narration in stories when recounting. I'm just going to get rid of anecdotal for now because, again, I don't want to really pair it with it. So Jobs employs first-person. Well, we can just say Jobs is. It sounds weird to say he employs it. He's speaking from his point of view. So you could just say Jobs' first-person narration style when recounting formative, good to say like what type of stories they are, formative stories from his life. Formative meaning things that influenced who he is today. They were formative. they formed him as he is. So just adding a little adjective there to complement the stories part of the quote, just to give it a little bit more specificity. We know that lifts the sophistication there, right? So just pairing formative with stories helps. So recounting formative stories from his life to humanize his journey from failure towards success, and thereby inspire his audience to realize or to pursue or to deploy a similar level of resilience, right? He wants the audience to be resilient. So now we're really diving deep into what the intended impact is on the audience versus what we originally had, which was just a general effect about conveying success amidst failure. So look at how much we're extending the analysis of the purpose so that it actually relates to the audience directly. We're humanizing and inspiring. That goes far beyond just saying success amidst failures. We still mention that. We're humanizing his journey from failure towards success because that's obviously related to the nature of the stories. But you do want to have these parts in purple. They're absolutely essential. Okay. And AB, just quick comment here. How often are the live streams run? We try to run them once a week, or I try to jump on once a week. Wasn't here last week, but almost every week, Tuesday from 7:30, jump on here and you can ask your questions and we'll give you feedback. So weekly, 7:30 Tuesdays, that's when you can jump on to the Jeddle live stream. Now, this is a really useful example, hopefully for you, because I'm showing you how you can improve what you say about your examples so that it's more related to the audience. That's the key takeaway so far. Now, this student obviously didn't read their work out loud, or I think they didn't, because they would have picked up on this blemish here where it says thus, and thus didn't make sense with the sentence structure that they had used. So instead of using thus, I'm just going to start this sentence afresh, and you could say, additionally, Jobs does this. Again, this sentence was missing this point or purpose sentence at the start without quotes. So I'll put this here. Don't use quotes in this first sentence. And you also do need to link to the stimulus. If you get a stimulus or a prompt for a reflection, then, because we're dealing here with the reflection piece for a craft of writing composition, if you do get a prompt or a stimulus, which you will, you also need to link where appropriate there. And the first sentence of each paragraph is a good opportunity to do that, in addition to somewhere in the introduction and the conclusion, and also the link sentence as well. So going down, just looking at the rest of it, similarly, I'm adding in my composition. I like the use of my composition. That's good. The reason why that's good is because it shows a personal voice and a personal reflective tone. So if you want to be reflective in a personal way, you should be using my and I. So that's good work from this student. Similarly, my composition emulates an anecdotal account of a younger first persona's perspective, maybe first person's perspective, of a younger first person perspective. Yeah, I think just let's not overcomplicate it here with the first person and persona. I'm assuming you're trying to say an account of a younger persona's perspective. A bit of a tongue twister there as well. Maybe it's just a younger perspective, a more youthful perspective. An anecdotal account of a younger perspective during a stormy night. Okay, so you're giving us some context here, integrating a short quote. I mean, look, I like the integration of short, concise quotes that seamlessly flow into your sentence and that add more context. So if you've got younger and stormy night and they were in your piece, that's great. Work them in as best you can. During a stormy night, to illustrate humanity's passive living. Now, passive living, you could say passivity. Maybe that's neither here nor there for you and not that important. I just think it will sound better. Passive living just sounds funny. You could say to illustrate the passivity of humanity, or the tendency to be passive in response to life's challenges, to illustrate the passivity, to illustrate the tendency to be passive rather than proactive or something like that, to be passive rather than assertive or resilient in response to life's challenges. Now, I'm not sure exactly where the life's challenges comes in here. Maybe the stormy night in the response is symbolic for that, a bit of whether that's pathetic fallacy or not. You're using this weather event as an example of hardships that you can't avoid because they're part of nature. That could be why you've incorporated that there. I haven't seen the composition, so it's hard to know. But I think I would be careful with that wording of like humanity's passive response or whatever it was. We can just go to illustrate I always like having to illustrate the tendency to be passive rather than assertive in response to life's challenges. Now, you could say to illustrate humanities. Yeah, humanity does sound a little bit funny. I mean, people used to write mans if it meant peoples, but then, that's got that gender thing, and I think people are scared of doing that. To illustrate man, when you say man like that, it means mankind, which means men and women. So, whatever you want to use there. You could say to illustrate our, that's another one, right? So our, man's, one's, humanities, sure. And then you might not have to say the if you do that. And then you say your point. But again, what we haven't done in this is talked about how you use this stylistic device here, the anecdotal account, which you would have to link back up here. You'd have to have said something about the anecdote, obviously, before you say the anecdote. Here, you need to pick between anecdote and first person, make it clear which one's your focal point. Or again, you might be combining them. In any case, you need to make it clear what your intended effect on the audience is. See how when you read through all of this, you can't see anything to do with the reader, to humanize, to inspire. Where's your one? To illustrate. You just say to illustrate a point. And that's kind of what I was saying before. You're not wording it in a way where it's about the intended impact on the reader or the audience, depending on what type of text it is. I'm just going to say reader. Steve Jobs was presenting a speech. I'm assuming you were using the speech that he gave at Harvard. That had a live audience, so we'd use audience. But here, if you wrote an imaginative composition or otherwise, maybe it wasn't for a live audience, so you can just say reader. But in any case, you've got to frame this effect in a way where it relates directly to the reader. So what were you trying to do? And how does the anecdote play into that? You haven't really talked about the importance of the anecdote to achieve this purpose. And that is the key ingredient missing in both of those sentences. So what is it about an anecdote that actually allows you to achieve, to have a certain impact on the reader? Well, an anecdote is relatable. An anecdote humanizes. We've already said humanize up here, but we can say that it builds, an empathetic or sympathetic connection with the audience, by relating an authentic experience with them, right? So by having an anecdotal account, it is going to create a more relatable perspective or a relatable experience that the audience, the reader / audience, can sympathize with or relate to which the reader / audience can relate. So I'm going to say it emulates this perspective during a stormy night to now project the passivity. I mean, you haven't really proven how it is a passive response, like saying that there's a younger perspective during a stormy night doesn't show how there's any sense of passive or any kind of passive response. You probably need better evidence to back that up, to be honest. But anyway, assuming you had that, of a younger perspective during a stormy night, and instead of saying to illustrate, we will say engage the reader with an authentic, and this is a little trick I like to do, an authentic, comma, and thus relatable, comma, because it's instead of just saying authentic and relatable, you're saying because it's authentic, it becomes relatable. To engage the reader with an authentic and thus relatable image. Because you're telling a story, now we can visualize it. See how I'm really trying to think about the effect of the anecdote. Because it's an anecdote, it creates an image in our head because you're telling a story, and now we can visualize that. It also makes it authentic because you're telling us a story from your life or the speaker's life firsthand. So engage the reader with an authentic and thus relatable image of passivity rather than assertion or assertiveness, right? Or resilience, let's go with that, of passivity rather than resilience in response to life's inevitable challenges. Okay, so that's where we get to there. And again, the key thing is you're engaging the reader. This is the key takeaway from this whole session here. When you are doing a craft of writing reflection, make sure that you are doing what I'm highlighting here in purple, which is speaking to your purpose in terms of the reader or audience. How are you trying to impact them? Not just what general point you are making. That's the difference between the red parts and the purple parts here. Okay? To engage the reader with an authentic and thus relatable, and again, I had it highlighted in yellow because the relatable image relates specifically to the anecdote. The fact that it was written in first person means that it humanizes and then can inspire. So the effect is constantly tying back to the technique that was used, the stylistic device, and secondly, to the impact on the reader. So it clearly connects with the technique and it clearly relates to the reader or audience. There are the two things that your effect should be doing in a reflection. So your analysis in a reflection needs to, one, this is a couple of summary points here. It needs to relate to the stylistic device that was used. And again, example is, if you did first person, that means it humanizes the speaker. Okay, so you're going to use the word humanize in the effect. So there's your direct relationship. And it also needs to relate, maybe I should say inner reflection needs to relate to the stylistic device and the reader or audience in terms of your intended impact. But it has to be about the reader or audience, not a generic effect. You get the point on that. I'd rather keep this neat. Okay, so that is the takeaway. Let me scroll up for that. That's the takeaway. That's what we've learned from going through a couple of those examples. All right, that's going to be key. If you want to get full marks in a reflection, you need to make sure your effects are explained that way. Just coming to a question here. How long should reflection and creative be for a 10-10 split? Well, remember that Module C, you get an allocation of 40 minutes in your final exam. Realistically, the essays for Mod A and Mod B will take a little bit longer if you get harder questions that maybe you weren't as well prepared for. So be prepared to only use up the 40 minutes for Module A and B. But assuming you went a little bit over, I would want to have a bit of a buffer, right? I want to have a buffer so that even if I'm only left with 30 minutes to do Module C, and I don't recommend putting yourself in that position, and you can avoid that position by timing out your essays and cutting them down before you go into the exam so that you know you have plenty of time to spare, so that you know your essays are 32 minutes, not 40 minutes on the dot, which will then end up taking you 50 minutes when you're adapting to a new question. So have much shorter essays to avoid getting into a situation where Module C, you only have 30 minutes to do Module C. But in the event that that does happen, I would want to make sure my Module C is particularly short. And if you have a 10-10 split, the the way I would split it up is to make sure I can do both sections in 30. I want to do both sections in 25 minutes. Okay, 25 minutes. So you'll need a little bit longer, funnily enough, to write the reflection to get the same amount of marks there, 10 and 10, because it's more essay-like, it's more analytical. The average word length is longer. When you're writing an imaginative piece or a discursive piece, the average word length is shorter. So you could have a 500-word response that takes much less time than a 500-word reflection, because the reflection is more like an essay and the words just, as I said, tend to be longer. So 10-10 split, I would divide the time roughly, 13 minutes each. Maybe you have a 400 to 500 word composition. I can't tell you the exact word count because it depends how fast you are at writing. So that's something you need to time out. What I would say on the reflection front is for a 10 to 12 mark reflection, I would want to have 2 body paragraphs, a 1-sentence intro, and a 1-sentence conclusion to wrap it up. If you miss the conclusion, don't worry. Okay, so that's kind of the structure I would advise. A short 1 to 2 sentence introduction, 2 body paragraphs focusing on 2 different stylistic elements, and then 1 concluding sentence if you get time. And then again, you want to time those out. Make sure you can do the full Module C piece in 25 minutes max. Most you'd want to have is 30 minutes, but because you don't know what the stimulus is going to be on the day, I like to be able to do everything to get the full 20 marks in Module C in 25 minutes or less. So that's particularly short. The essays, I go up to 32, 33, max 34 minutes for a draft. Module C, I want to be able to achieve all 20 marks, whether it's through a 20-mark imaginative composition or a 10 and 10 split between imaginative and reflection. I want to be able to do all that in about 25 minutes. Okay, that's me being honest, because that is how you plan for worst case scenarios. If you get really hard essay questions or you go over there, hey, at least I prepared for a 25-minute Mod C so I can buy some time back. I borrowed time with the other modules. I was prepared to have less time for Mod C. That's the kind of strategic mindset you need to have to be prepared for scenarios and ensure you finish that exam paper. That is so important. You can have amazing material, and let me just remove this for a second. You guys can have amazing material for each section of the exam, but if you go over time on the day because you're trying to write the perfect response to a new question and your essay was too long and you've chewed up all this extra time, you're going to be left with a half-finished Mod C paper, and all that great work that you did on the essays is more than offset by the fact you're only going to get half the marks or less for Module C. The same logic applies for Section 1 and the Common Module essay, where a lot of students will do the essay first and they write this amazing 20 out of 20 essay, and then they only have 25 minutes, 30 minutes to do Section 1. They end up getting 9 out of 20. So all the good work they did on the essay was basically voided or nullified or offset by all those lost marks from Section 1. So your time management on the day is critical to make sure that you get the timing right. Make sure that your Module C piece is 25 minutes or less, whether that is one full 20-mark composition, for example, an imaginative or discursive, or whether it's a 12 and 8-mark split between the composition and the reflection. Either way, I would want to have it down to 25 minutes when I write it out. That gives you plenty of time to adapt to the stimulus on the day, which you're not sure what it will be. And then it also ensures you have a safety buffer, right? You have this buffer there in case you go over for modules A and B. So that's how I think about timing for Mod C. I can't tell you a word count because I don't know how fast you will write. How do you prepare for Mod A and Mod B essays without memorizing a pre-planned essay? Well, the best way to prepare for any essay in the exam is to draft an essay and practice writing it in response to new questions. There is no getting around that. Anything else, largely, is a waste of time. You have so many sections to prepare for. There are 5 sections in the HSC exam, 5 sections to prepare for. All I would be doing, and I'm not going to tell you what other people do, I'm just going to say what I would be doing, after years of going through this with students, seeing which students are getting state ranks, seeing which students came up short. The best strategy that I've seen work is to prepare a perfect draft. Perfect meaning you have done it as well as possible. You've got feedback from others. You've spoken to teachers. You've gone to friends. They have given you all the feedback. You might have someone else looking at it. You've refined it. You've timed it. You've learned it super well. So you've got that perfect draft to a question that you're comfortable with for that particular module. And then you spend all of your time writing new introductions, using that draft as a base, whether you've memorized it or not, just being familiar with your argument and your structure and your examples. You do have to memorize quotes and techniques and sentence starters and things like that. That just makes you faster on the day. So you do have to do that. I don't know, like the premise of the question is without memorizing, but of course you have to memorize examples. You have to know your quotes exactly. You should know how you're going to start your sentences when the sentence start just kind of makes sense for any question. You've got to put yourself in the best spot to write as fast as possible because the amount you write does matter. So yeah, the premise isn't completely accurate because you should at least memorize parts of the essay so you're ready to go. But the key thing I'm saying is once you have a base draft prepared, what the best students do is they look at a range of different questions. So I would look at 3 to 5 different essay questions, and then I would be practicing writing new introductions and new topic sentences like crazy. So I'd just be going, I'm going to write a new introduction. I'm looking at a different type of question that I'm uncomfortable with. And then you get comfortable with it. You go through that process of figuring out what would I say based on my current understanding and draft for this type of question. And then that forces you to think about other things that you might need to have in the back pocket in case parts of your draft aren't relevant. So going through the process of looking at different questions will force you to learn any extra materials that you might need on the day. That's the point. But you want to have a really solid draft essay so that you have amazing go-to evidence. You talk about context, you talk about form, you know how to structure your sentences and your paragraphs. You've got all that ready to go so that you're not wasting time on the day. All you want to spend your time doing on the day is literally writing and thinking about how you can answer the question. And if you only want to think about answering the question, you need to already know all of your core materials very, very well. Whether a student consciously memorizes a response or not, the best students have all practiced enough to effectively know a core essay or multiple kind of types of essays that they could write. They know all of their materials. They're recycling them again and again. They might be saying something different each time slightly, but whether they've consciously word for word memorized or otherwise, they've practiced it enough to effectively know it really well. There's no escaping that. So that is the best way to prepare for a Mod A and Mod B essay. It's to build a core draft, cut it down so that you can do it in 32 to 34 minutes. So you have a lot of time to spare to answer the question on the day, and you don't feel like you should just write out that draft essay. And then and again, how you memorize it or how much you memorize, that's up to you. I would learn as much as possible so I'm quicker on the day to write. And then I'm practicing lots of different questions, and I'm especially doing lots of introductions and topic sentences, not doing full essays every time because that takes too much time. I'd rather do what matters most, which is going to be setting that strong impression through an introduction and topic sentence, and doing that again and again, and then forcing myself to consider other things that I might need to have in the back pocket. Maybe I do need to change my core essay a little bit to be more adaptable. Maybe I need to have more context. Maybe I need to have more form. The only way you're going to know what you need to do is to have that draft and then to look at a range of different types of questions that could come up and force yourself to answer it and figure out where the gaps are. That's literally the best thing you can do. And the other thing, of course, as I've mentioned time and time again, is to time your essays and cut them down so that what you're trying to write is reasonable in length. If you're a slow writer, you might only be able to do 600 words. If you're a faster writer, maybe you can do 900 words. Either way, I would make sure you have time to spare in that 40-minute window to do each section. So you can do the draft in 32 to 34 minutes. I'd make sure I have time to spare so that you can think and adapt and answer the question, which teachers are just constantly on the lookout for, because that's the big differentiator these days. If you think about it, it's even more important than last year and the previous year because AI's come in, everyone's getting tutoring, everyone's getting these great base essays, but the real test on the day is how well do you understand the text in order to answer a new question? How well can you think about that question and apply your core understanding, and you might have a great draft. How well can you actually tie it to the question? So that skill of adapting is exponentially valuable now each year, right? That's really how you stand out. So the more you practice new questions and tweaking and adapting and changing what you had planned, that skill of adapting is going to be the differentiator between you maybe getting a 15 out of 20 because you just wrote a memorized essay that might have been really good but not relevant, 15 out of 20 and a 20 out of 20. Okay. And we have plenty of videos on how to adapt to different questions. I've done breakdowns on the YouTube channel. Obviously on Jeddle.com, if you subscribe to the resources, there are examples of how you can adapt to different questions. So you can subscribe to Jeddle to get more insight on that. But that's something we can also look at in these live streams. So if you need help adapting an essay to a question, then what I would recommend you do is in the link below the live streams, submit, a short introduction. Give me like 3 sentences from a draft that you're happy to share, and then give me an essay question that you were responding to, and then give me a second essay question that you would like to adapt to. And then I can show you how you can actually tweak or adjust your original to the new question. Let me know in the comments if you'd find that helpful. If I take an example and show you how you can go from an original to an adapted version using an unseen question, because that skill set, I cannot emphasize enough, is so important. Okay. What's your advice on a mod B unseen question on Elliot? Prepare quotes plus analysis. I mean, skeleton paragraphs, it's the same as what I just said. I would have everything prepared. I'd have a full draft essay prepared. I'm not going to lie to you guys about what I would do. That is what I would do. Everyone gets hung up on the memorization point, right? It's up to you how much you want to memorize. I've seen memorization backfire on students because they got flustered on the day. They weren't great at memorizing. That just wasn't, and that's fine. Like, word for word memorization is not for everyone. It's a brutal process. It takes a lot of focus, and some people have it and some don't. It doesn't matter. You can still get perfect marks without being able to memorize something word for word. But I've seen it backfire where that just was not the best strategy for certain students. So let's not get hung up on the memorization piece. You obviously need to know your quotes and analysis. I'm all about speed on the day, because the faster you can be on the day, the more you can write, right? And the better you can focus on the question. The better you know your core materials and sentence starters and your structures, your skeleton paragraphs, the better you know all of that, and the more that you've practiced that, the faster you'll be at responding to the question and writing things down. If you're not prepared and you don't know much, you're going to write the wrong quotes, you're going to not know how to start a sentence. It's just, you don't need to put yourself in that position. So put yourself in a position to succeed, learn the sentence starters, learn your structure super well. If you are a good kind of memorizer, then you can memorize a lot of the essays. But again, for some students, that doesn't work. What works better is they learn their quotes and techniques off by heart, because you just need to know those. And then what they do is they learn all of those things in order. So they know which quote comes first, what the technique is, and then they memorize a key word from the explanation. So they draft up the piece that they're happy with, which if they submit it as a typed response, they feel would get the best mark possible for them. And then what they do is they highlight a trigger word. Okay, a trigger word is a word that will trigger your memory about what the rest of the sentence was, or what the main point you wanted to make was. And again, you can adapt that on the day to the question, and you should, but at least have a trigger word and it's a word that's kind of unique to that sentence. So say you had a metaphor, you had a quote, and then you had a word like empowerment, or you had not a general word that you use all throughout the essay. Maybe it's a word like empowerment. Maybe it's a word. I'm just thinking now, because there's a lot of words that you might use repeatedly throughout. It's going to be a very specific word. Maybe it's like psychological deterioration. I'm just giving you an example like that. That's 2 words, but that's a phrase. And maybe psychological deterioration is the thing that's going to trigger your memory of what that whole point was about. That's about the psychological deterioration. I remember the rest of what I was trying to say there. Great. And you would have practiced doing it multiple times. It might look different each time, but you're saying roughly the same thing, and you're getting better and better at it. So Hopefully that makes sense. You don't need to memorize everything word for word. You do need to be familiar with a core draft that you have perfected and timed and cut down and practiced adapting to new questions. If you literally follow that formula, you're going to do really well. The students who do the best just execute that formula the best. There is literally no secret other than that to doing well in English. Like, it is just that formula. Okay. Don't overcomplicate it. It's not about notes. It's not about going through dot point summaries. It's about having a core draft to a question that reflects your understanding of the text that your teacher's gone through, that you have sharpened up, and then practicing responding to multiple questions. If you can do that well, you're going to nail the exam. And time management, as I said, if you can nail the time management element, you're going to do better than most students. So in terms of a specific structure, though, if I come back to your question, it doesn't matter that it's an unseen question on Elliot. The general structure I would recommend for any single text essay. So if you're doing T.S. Eliot, you're doing the poetry, you're doing 1984, whatever you're doing, if it's one text versus the comparative study, then I would typically do 3 body paragraphs. So for a single text essay, like Module B or the Common Module, I would do 3 body paragraphs. And the paragraph progression should roughly follow a problem slash, sorry about thumbs up, problem slash response or consequence of that problem to resolution or lack of resolution structure. So what's the problem that's established at the outset of the text or in one of Eliot's poems? Like, what's one of the big problems? What's a consequence of that problem is in the second paragraph. And that might be a further problem, okay? So it's like a way to kind of tackle 2 problems there. You might also say, here's the problem in the first paragraph. Individuals feel alienated within this urbanized society. Okay, so you feel alienated. Okay, that happens. As a result of the alienation, humans crave intimacy or yearn for intimate connections. Then you bring in the next poem or next set of examples. But you could also say, as a result of the alienation, humans respond in this way. So if instead of alienation, let's think of 1984 in response to an oppressive totalitarian government where individuals have all their power and autonomy taken away from them. First paragraph. In the second paragraph, you might say, well, individuals will try to resist that. They'll try to preserve their autonomy. So trying to preserve your autonomy might be the individual response, which might be your second body. The third body should be interrogating whether there's a solution or a resolution to this problem, because that's typically how a text unfolds. With poetry, it's a little bit more complicated because you've got different poems, but that's why you have to select them strategically so you're effectively following that as if they were a novel. Now, with the third paragraph for an essay, when you're focusing on the resolution, you should be exploring whether the author is suggesting, here is the way out of this problem. Maybe the text itself is part of the solution. Maybe that's making the audience aware of the problem, and that enlightenment is part of the solution. But the key is that to have that progression throughout the 3 paragraphs, and the resolution is going to explain why or why not there is a resolution and what that resolution is suggested or purported to be. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense for you. So if you're doing Eliot, you might start with the state of internal, or well, we might say there's this external alienation going on where because of urbanization, everyone feels alienated from each other. Then you might talk about like the internal fragmentation of the individual and like how the psyche has become fragmented and they feel that they're dislocated internally. So you might talk about external, then internal, or vice versa. And then you might say, well, the way to get out of that is through spiritual redemption. Like that's the only path out, that you need to find a sense of spiritual purpose. And then that's when maybe you talk about Journey of the Magi at the end. You could go about it completely differently. That's just a structure that I like. That's how I would think about it. As long as it's progressing forward from a problem to a possible resolution or even a failed resolution, like you might not have a positive ending. But either way, it needs to move forward. And hopefully that answers that question. So what are some tips to writing a base or skeleton essay? First of all, it's do it in response to a question. A lot of students make the mistake of writing a base essay to no question. They want this generic essay. Get a generic question if you're going to do that. Just get a generic question that you love. Find an essay question that you would love to see on the day and write an essay in response to that. It at least frames your discussion with purpose, like you're answering that question versus just writing these ideas generally. By doing that, it might not actually impact the wording too much. Like you still come up with your generic essay, but it's good to have a question in mind, trust me, because then when you get a new question, it means that you're more aware of the parts of the essay that were attuned or focused on that original question versus the new question. And it actually makes you more adaptable. So key point 1 to writing a base or skeleton essay is to have a practice question that you love. Find a practice essay question that you love, that you're comfortable with. It could be super broad or it could be super specific. Personally, I like specific questions. Look at this, thumbs up, thumbs down. It's all thumbs up here. So the second point is when you develop a scaffold or a base essay, start with the topic sentences. So you need to figure out what your 3 key ideas are, or 4 if you happen to be doing a 4-paragraph structure. But if you're doing 3, you need to figure out what your topic sentences are. The second mistake that students make is they start writing an introduction for a draft. How can you write an introduction when you don't know what you're introducing? It literally doesn't make sense to start writing an introduction when you're drafting. Of course, it makes sense to write an introduction on the day of the exam because you've already thought about your argument. You know what you're introducing. You're just changing the wording based on the question. But if you think about it, when you're thinking through an essay, you need to work out the scaffold in terms of the ideas. And those main ideas are expressed through your topic sentences. So the best students will think through their topic sentences, then think about the evidence that supports those topic sentences and ensure they're not repeating the same points within them. And they ensure that those topic sentences move forward based on that problem, consequence, or response, and resolution structure. So they'll have a 3-body paragraph structure. Each topic sentence addresses the problem, then the struggle or consequence or response, and then finally whether there's a resolution or not. So if you follow that structure and you build the topic sentences first, followed by the evidence that you want to use to support those points, that will make your introduction, which you do after your body paragraphs, way easier because you know all the points you're going to make, so you know what to introduce. So they're kind of the 2 key points. I mean, the third point on writing a base skeleton essay, because you asked for some tips, this is the third tip, in addition to using a question that you love, using the 3-body paragraph problem, consequence, or response resolution structure, where you're starting with your topic sentences before doing an introduction. The third tip that I'd give for building a base essay is to use a lot of form and context, because form and context, if you're linking all of your evidence to context, you're linking to form, that's all going to be recyclable across different questions, because there's never a time where talking about the contextual influences on a text are going to be irrelevant. They're always going to be relevant. So the more context and the more macro features you have, like the stylistic features, when you talk about genre, like 1984, you might say it's a dystopian novel. When wouldn't you be able to say that? You'll always be able to say that. So that's the key there for kind of building a really robust, adaptable essay, okay? Build it in the right way. Start with your topic sentences, respond to a question, and finally, make sure you use a lot of context and form or macro elements in your evidence so that you've got a highly adaptable essay that can respond to a whole range of questions without you feeling you need to change out the examples. Do you have any tips on adapting a draft Module C piece to different questions? Yes, I do. I have a very popular, I'm going to say popular, I have what I think is a very useful video on YouTube about how to respond to a Module C stimulus. It's using the LIFE acronym, L-I-F-E, so you can interpret the stimulus literally. You can interpret it You can internalize it, so it could be reflecting the character's thoughts or your speaker's thoughts. The stimulus could also be interpreted figuratively. So if it says you need to use this, the question has like a particular keyword, like use this as a key setting. It doesn't have to be a literal setting. It could be a figurative setting. It could be the setting that the character or speaker desires or that they're constantly thinking back to. So, and then E is for externalize. The stimulus might be something that is removed from your character or speaker. It's something they're talking about. It's something that they can see, but it's not, maybe it's a bit of dialogue that they heard someone else say, not that they themselves said. So if you watch the video on how to interpret any stimulus, that should help you there, but use the LIFE acronym for thinking more broadly about how to adapt to any stimulus. You did ask there about different questions. I'm assuming you mean the stimuli specifically. So the extract that you get given or the image that you get given. Think really broadly about how you can adapt to that or use it, because a lot of students, the mistake students make is they see an image and they think, well, that's not where I set my piece, or that's not relevant to my piece. And then they throw out everything they prepared and they write something new, but it's completely unprepared, so it doesn't sound as good, and they end up going a lot worse. Whereas you could think more creatively about a stimulus and think, maybe I'll interpret that symbolically, meaning figuratively. Maybe the image of that ocean represents freedom, or maybe it represents how my character feels like they're drowning. And then you start to use language like that makes it clear how you're using the stimulus. You're using words like drowning for the ocean, but you're relating it to their experience. So use the stimulus and the question in a way that works for you. And to do that, you're going to need to be very broad and flexible with how you interpret the question and the stimulus. So watch the video on YouTube. It's on our channel. Just type in how to interpret or adapt to a stimulus for Module C, something like that. And you should get some good tips and examples on that. All right, I'm going to end it there. It's been fun, this one. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you want me to focus on next time. And remember, you can come to these 7:30 p.m. Tuesday sessions with your assessment notification, with a question, and ask for my advice. Happy to provide that. Feel free to submit a response or just a part of a response. Remember, otherwise we won't look at it. 100 to 150 words might be a thesis statement in response to a question, and we will give you feedback on that in these sessions. Thanks so much, everyone. We will see you soon. Don't forget to check out Jeddle.com for help with resources, study guides, anything to help you with your exam, especially as you've got trials coming up. Jeddle.com has a whole range of resources that I know will be helpful for you. And you can also check out JeddAI if you want that instant marking and you want to get in touch with our team to look through some of your work and get feedback on that to instantly improve. So we'll leave it at that. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.